Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos pregame walkthrough brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. My name is Ben Grant, his name's JB, and we are here to get you set for some Thursday night football as the Argos take to the road for the first time this season, taking on AJ Ouellette, Corey Mace, and the rest of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. We got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the supplemental draft that just occurred that you may not have heard about. We'll give you what we know on it. Robert Priester is back in town. The Argos also made two other signings, Jay Person, Mike Milton. Jonathan Edouard was named PFF's top player of the week with a 90.2 grade. We'll get into that and the ramifications that may fall after that. We've got pick six, game previews, injury reports, OCDC, one thing, predictions, put me down for 20, and our CFL picks. All of that and more is coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. JB, I want to talk to our lovely listeners about your favorite Something in the Water beer. And I've got one in front of me right here for those watching on YouTube. This is it's called Liberty's Farm to Glass Pilsner. It is definitely up there in my top five. I still have a special place in my heart for Longboat. There's so many different beers that I like from Something in the Water. JB, this is your favorite, and I think the coolest thing about the Liberty's Farm to Glass Pilsner is that the principle of it is that it will taste different depending on where it is brewed. And this particular beer is brewed locally, and so it means that all of their resources, all of their materials, all their ingredients are sourced locally. And so a Toronto brew using farms from around the GTA will have a different taste than if you were to brew this in the southern United States, for example. And so I think that is kind of cool. And so in that way, this is a real taste of Toronto and makes it a wonderful local beer. And it is a fantastic Pilsner, I've got to say. Definitely in my top five. JB, I think you're number one. And so, great beer for us to talk about today. Next time you're at Something in the Water in Liberty Village, give JB's favorite beer a shot, Liberty's Farm to Glass Pilsner. Okay, let's get into this thing, JB. The supplemental draft. There's not a lot of clarity, not a lot of media around this. We don't talk about this a lot. I wanted to talk about this one because there have actually been two so far this season. Antonio Alfano and then most recently receiver Zach Mathis. So essentially what happens is when a player qualifies late as a Canadian, they enter a supplemental draft. In the past, there have been sometimes two or three players. Generally, it's just one, and that was the case with both of these supplemental drafts. What then happens is this Canadian player, because they're Canadian, they have to go through the draft process, unlike Americans. And teams have a chance to sacrifice, I don't know the right word for that, JB, to surrender a pick from next year's draft in order to get a player in this year's supplemental draft. And it's almost like an auction where the highest bid at the end ends up succeeding in their bid for that player. And so with the first supplemental draft, that was Antonio Alfano, the Edmonton Elks ended up succeeding with an 8th round pick. So all they had to sacrifice was an 8th round pick from next year's draft. And that worked out really well for them because Alfano was almost immediately starting. He played, of course, against Toronto, started against Toronto on the defensive line. With this draft, I actually wondered leading up to this if the Argos might make a play. Not that they have a weakness at Canadian receiver where Zach Mathis plays, but because they understand the value of having as many good quality Canadian receivers as you can. When I looked at Mathis's film, to me, he looked like a 2nd or 3rd round prospect when I would, one that I would typically grade as like a 2nd round, 3rd round value. And so for me, I thought the Argos might put out a 3rd round pick on someone like that. It ended up being nowhere close because the Edmonton Elks ended up succeeding in their bid, but with a 1st rounder, which could, in theory, be the first overall pick in next year's draft. We'll see how the Elks fare for the rest of the season. But yeah, I think a really interesting player, 6'7", moves very well for his size, certainly a red zone target, and a guy that can, in theory, come in and contribute this season. JB, were the Argos correct in not? Well, we don't even know. They could have, in theory, offered a first rounder, but Edmonton would have trumped that with their first overall because the draft order is still standing from the 2024 draft. So there's nothing. If Edmonton wanted to spend their first round pick, no one else could have bid on him, and we will never know how that process went. But would you have put in a bid if you were Toronto for Zach Mathis?
Yeah, I'm sure they did. I think, I would probably put in a second round pick. I think if he were available, I think if he's available in the draft, he probably goes late first, high second, just because he's so tall. His measurables are pretty good. He did get invited to an NFL minicamp. I think he is a project. He is not a plug and play. Edmonton is clearly feeling the pressure to try and add some excitement, to add some scoring punch in the red zone. He's built more like an NFL tight end. So I'm sure Hamilton had some interest in him.
Not the weight size, though. He needs to put on some weight. He's like 203 pounds. But if he bulked up, he looks just size-wise, like 6'7" is very unusual.
I think it's a nice play. I mean, he would not be the first overall pick in the draft.
No.
So of course, I don't think it would make any sense for Toronto. Toronto is not going to use their first round pick on a wide receiver next year.
No, well, they just, they use that this year, and they're well stocked. Like you got Tommy Neal, Richie Sindani, Dejan Brissett, Kevin Mittal,
and to
Dave
be honest,
Ungerer, and none of those guys are 30, right? They're all of their Canadian receivers are under 30, so there's not even a pressure there.
He's built more like an American receiver, like he's built like an American red zone receiver. Traditionally the wide receivers who really excel in the CFL are not incredibly tall. It's just not. It's not the same. It's a bigger end zone. It requires a little more mobility. So I don't see the comp for who they think he's going to be. But I guess I can salute Edmonton for not going quietly into that night.
Yeah, well, their chips are all in, right? Because there is no next year potentially for that staff. They need to make sure that they do everything they can this year to get wins. So I'm sure that is part of the thinking, whereas other teams aren't necessarily on that hot seat. 6'7", 203, North Dakota State. I'm excited to see him play, but again, I think that's something that, I'm sure the Argos did have interest, but they couldn't have outbid Edmonton with that one spot.
Not at that price. I would assume they probably bid a third.
JB, Robert Priester is back with the double blue. I for one am happy about this. I like Priester. I think he's a really talented player. He can play a lot of different spots, which I like. And there was a need as well, because last time we saw Quincy Mauger leave the playing surface at BMO Field, he was on crutches, and this is going to be a long-term leg injury from the sounds of things. And so they needed an answer. There were not a lot of immediate solutions at Sam. There was the possibility of putting Royce Metier down there, but now you have to go with a rookie at safety, and there's the shuffling around that you don't like there. You could put Jonathan Edouard there, but that's a short-term solution. Edouard, we're going to talk about a lot later, because he had a great week last week, but he's not an ideal Sam backer. And they moved him around once the pieces started moving. They had to shift him. And so there wasn't really a great immediate answer on the roster. Priester has played a little bit of that spot. He's played halfback. He's played corner. Like he's a great veteran to bring in there when this young secondary is looking for some answers. And I expect him to be playing the Sam spot in this game against Saskatchewan. But yeah, that makes sense. And great to see Priester back at practice today. I'm sure you're on the same page with me, JB.
Yeah, it's a very, it's a smart move. He knows the system. The secondary lost a lot of institutional knowledge through veterans who left, and he can come in. He knows what they're running. Like you say, he's versatile. I think he will give that secondary a little bit of a little breathing room to be able to have him in there. And so you don't necessarily have to have Franklin and Johnson playing. at the same time. And if people go down, it gives you a little more flexibility. It's a great signing. We've always been big Priester fans, so I don't see any reason for him not to rejoin.
They just need to bring back Maurice Carnell the fourth and bring that whole team back together. That secondary group.
I know. I miss that secondary.
Yeah, that was a fun group, and yeah, Priester was a big part of that. But yeah, I expect him to be thrown right into the fire this week because there's a need. So he'll probably be out there as much as he can. They're cycling guys through at practice today. They're cycling guys through multiple spots. You always are, because there's the potential. Mike Hogan and I were talking about this on the broadcast last week. The CFL roster is so difficult because it really handcuffs you. You have to go light somewhere. Most teams go really light on the offensive line. Most teams will dress like 6 linemen total. And now if you lose 2 O-linemen, you're having to put a defensive lineman on your O-line or a tight end on your O-line. Like it's a bad situation. We saw Hamilton get stuck like that last year against Toronto, where they had Casey Sales playing left guard. And that's not ideal. But if it doesn't happen to you on the O-line, it can happen to you somewhere else. And the Argos were in a bit of a spot last week where they lost Quincy Mauger, and then Edwards went down briefly as well. And you're thinking, well, there aren't a lot of answers here. Where are they going to move guys to? Who's going to play this spot? Who's going to play this spot? And so, knowing that Mauger is probably going to be out for a little while now, they just don't have a proven backup Sam. And Tyshawn Blackburn maybe has sort of a prototypical body type for that. He could maybe learn to play that spot, but you don't want to throw a rookie right in there at the Sam spot. That's usually the last place that you start to learn. Usually for Americans, Canadian DBs, for Canadians, you're often starting at the safety spot. For Americans, you're starting at corner and then working your way in. And then Sam potentially is something that you get to. And we'll talk a bit more about the Sam backer spot a little bit later in the show. But yeah, great to have Priester back. He looked like he didn't miss a beat at practice today, other than his number. He's wearing 19 now because his number 23 is being worn by Benji Franklin. And so with Marquise Waters Marquise Waters was let go as part of that same transaction, and he was wearing 19 before. Surprised at all that was the end of Marquise Waters. Like, I didn't think his playing time went particularly well. He was out there as the will backer in the previous game, looked a bit lost in coverage on the field, which surprised me because I thought that would really be his strength. And I had thought he had the sort of measurables and the skill set to maybe be able to play that Sam spot at some point. But the Argos obviously not seeing it that way. And I guess they just felt he was too much of a liability in coverage and in assignments, and Waters went. But yeah, he's a player. Muddy Waters was a player that we both liked. So sad to see him go, and Priester now wearing that 19. The other 2 signings that the Argos made, defensive lineman Jay Person and defensive back Mike Milton. JB, do you want to talk about Jay Person, the defensive lineman, a little bit, and what you see in him as an ad?
Yeah, I mean, he's interesting. He had some time in the NFL. He had some time with the Patriots. He played for Chattanooga and was well recognized in his conference. He's undersized for the NFL. They had him as a linebacker in the NFL. He's 230, 6'2", where he'll be like a defensive lineman for the CFL. But I think he's a nice, quick-footed edge guy. I think that he can be a nice rotation guy, because he played linebacker, right? So he isn't somebody who's naturally going to be a defensive lineman. So he's a little faster than some of the other linemen. I don't think he's going to be an edge rush guy, but I think he is a nice guy to bring in the rotation who can hold up his end in run support.
Yeah, I think you look at his size and body type, like that 6'2", 233 type, and the speed that he's got, and you look at like Derek Parrish, and you look at Flo Remalade, like it's similar sized guys that if you can learn behind those guys, maybe kind of develop that side of things. Like, you don't want to put him, he's not big enough to be on the interior, but I do think there's some, I think he could be a really interesting player as either a rush end or a quick end. I don't know how they're going to put him there yet.
It's tough to see. We'll have to see a little more of him in terms of what his first step is like, because that wouldn't be something he would have a ton of experience playing linebacker in college.
Right, and it's hard to gauge.
But his resume is interesting, and he's young, so I think he certainly has potential, and he certainly. There was a time where playing for New England was a big deal.
Yeah, days gone by. So the other signing, Mark Milton. Mark Milton, not new to the CFL, fairly new to the CFL. So he actually signed with Hamilton back in May and played against Calgary June 7th before eventually being released. So he played at Baylor, spent a bit of time with the Carolina Panthers. He's a really interesting guy in coverage. Actually, what's kind of funny about his skill set, he doesn't match up the same way as some of the other corners on this roster. Like when I first started looking up his film, I expected to see what I saw in guys that they liked, in Benji Franklin and Leonard Johnson and stuff. And that's not really the same thing that I saw. His coverage looks fine for me on film. I think his run support is pretty good. I think he's very reliable, does his job, finishes his assignments. And so I think there's something there, but he doesn't jump off the page the way that some of the other guys do. He doesn't have the dazzling highlights that some of these other guys do. But yeah, he's a tackling machine on the corner. And so cycling guys through, you're always a fan of that. Bring the next few guys through and see what we can get from it. And I said Muddy Waters have obviously released, I said that before, Darius Joyner also released, the other defensive back who did spend some time at Sam. And again, it just seems so odd to me. You lose your Sam backer. Darius Joyner was dressed as Sam before. I don't know what the story is with him exactly and how that went down. And then Muddy Waters, we talked about already. But yeah, those are all the transactions this week. JB, the top PFF grade of the week was Jonathan Edouard, 90.2. And so he was honored for his achievements this week. Kind of an unusual one because he didn't start, but he ended up playing a lot of snaps, ended up with 26 total snaps, 1 tackle, 1 pick, which was a phenomenal pick in the end zone, and a knockdown as well. So he came on in relief. He started playing in that dime package, like when they sent an extra DB out there. He did get some snaps early in the game. And then as we moved into the second half, I think it was near the end of the third quarter, he came in for the rest of the game replacing Leonard Johnson. And that was after Toronto gave up that 40-yard touchdown on the third and short, what looked like it was going to be a QB sneak. And instead it was a Caleb Evans touchdown pass to Cole Speaker. And that was the last time we saw Leonard Johnson out there on defense. And Jonathan Edouard took over for him there. Let's talk a little bit about Jonathan Edouard before we get to Leonard Johnson and what this may mean going forward. But he flashed last week, and I thought there was something special we saw, not just in the pick. The pick was fantastic, but this hasn't been a defense that has been generating turnovers with the ease they did last year. They've only got the 2. There was the one against BC in week 1, and then this week the pick by Edouard. Maybe putting a guy like him in there who can potentially change the field and turn the ball over is what this team needs, because he did look sensational out on the field last week.
Yeah, I thought he surprised me, actually, how quickly he kind of turned into somebody who can be really useful for them. I'm sure they were really, I don't know if they were surprised, but he's a nice versatile piece that they have now.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Like I just didn't see him as being a starting corner. I liked him. It's funny because I did like him in his draft year, and then he was largely ignored, and I haven't really thought much of it since. And then suddenly seeing him on the field there, yeah, he absolutely looked like he belonged, and was getting rotated in at practice, and we'll see how that ends up working out. But were you surprised when he came in last week for Leonard Johnson and not Benji Franklin, who had been maybe more high profile in some of the busts the previous week? I think Franklin probably played better last week, but Leonard Johnson was having a pretty rough game. And so it just seemed like the coaching staff is like, we got to make a change here. And so they put Edouard in. What did you see from Leonard Johnson and from Benji Franklin? And is this the right move now?
Well, I mean, I see them both as being pretty similar, So I think in that way, they're probably relatively interchangeable in terms of these are, two really fast cornerbacks who are both pretty good at tackling, but both need to improve their tackling. Both are okay at zone, but need to improve their zone and need to just generally get more experience playing Canadian football. So I see it as a bit of a coin toss between the two. I think they seem to like Franklin a little more. So that's interesting to see, but it would not surprise me if Johnson got some Franklin reps.
Franklin's had a little bit more time in the CFL. Obviously, he's a little faster. We thought Franklin was having trouble in space, and is this something where you feel like a move to the boundary might help out a guy like Benji Franklin?
I think so. I mean, I think if you put a guy in a phone booth, and then it's really just a question of speed. Can you stay with your defender? Because generally speaking, you don't have to worry about picking up stuff in space. You're right there. So I in that way, the boundary is a little easier, I think, for somebody who the hardest thing of the CFL for American players is just the size of the field, and it's like going from pool to snooker. Everything is bigger and all your angles are different, and so there you go. Not many people get a pool to snooker reference, but there you have it.
That is the first one we've ever had on the show. And looking at Leonard Johnson's touchdowns, like he gave up 2 last week. Tough, but we could kind of see what the criticism might be. So the first one was that was the Philpott touchdown. He ends up staying with his man. There didn't seem like there was a switch there. I don't know if there was supposed to be, if they were supposed to banjo and switch that. They didn't. Again, I don't know what the play call is. I'm not sure what the instructions were there. He ends up getting into a collision with Philpott, gets knocked on his back, sort of falls over, I guess, pursuing, and then Philpott ran in all alone. But you and I were talking about this. We thought that maybe that's an angle thing. Maybe that's just inside leverage and not being in position to be able to take that on and just getting out physical when you should be the one as the more physical player. He's a big physical DB typically. So maybe that was a point of criticism there. And then the touchdown on the 3rd and short, that was what looked like a pretty tough one because he's lined up on the outside as the corner. So initially it looks like he's lined up with Speaker initially, and then Antwi comes all the way across the formation and lines up on the edge like a wing. And so depending, again, we don't know the play call, we don't know what the instructions are. In a lot of zero looks there, he would take the outside guy. And so his guy would now shift to Antwi, they kind of ran a little bit of a pick here, but Antwi essentially had a quick out, and it looked like Mason Pierce went with him and nobody went with Cole Speaker. And then it looked like, because he was the closest guy trailing, that was probably supposed to have been Leonard Johnson, but I don't quite know what the call was on that and how that was determined. But based on the fact that was his last play on the field, you have to believe the coaching staff felt that was his man in coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether there wasn't a switch call, like I looking at it, I didn't think it was his fault, but clearly they felt like if somebody's being jacked up, that should be an automatic switch, and then he didn't make the switch. On top of playing the spike release wrong, that clearly, they felt like they needed to make a change. So I'm still pulling for him. I think these are fixable mistakes. If he's a first year DB, this is gonna, these are the mistakes that you're gonna make.
Yeah, Leonard, and we were spoiled with Qantas Stiggers last year. That's not what first-year corners look like. What the stuff that Stiggers was doing, it's just not normal. And we know that because he's now not only in the NFL, he's doing really well right now with the New York Jets in the NFL. And so you just see that's not normal first-year results for a corner. Leonard Johnson, I think, is above expectation and yet is struggling still. That's okay. We like him as a player. We think he's going to be a good corner. We like Franklin the same way. They've made mistakes, sure, but there's the tools are there. The stuff that a lot of the stuff that you can't teach is there, and as long as they're able to learn and willing to learn, they will come along. And now Jonathan Edouard is a new face to cheer for too. So again, PFF recognizing that, and I think they were dead on with that. Other guys that were recognized by PFF this week: Gregor McKellar, right guard on the all PFF team for the week.
He played great.
Yeah, he was awesome. He had a really nice, actually the offensive line in general played extremely well, despite the fact that the numbers don't necessarily show it, but their rushing was so good. They were opening up gaps against a very good run defense in Montreal. And so that's where they get a lot of credit. I know the protection wasn't quite as clean as we've sometimes seen this group, but their run blocking was so on point that they have to get a lot of credit, and Gregor McKellar leading the way in that regard. Robbie Smith off the edge had a great game. Wynton McManus was the one of the linebackers from the PFF team. So yeah, a few Argos being recognized in that tough loss is still nice to see. Okay, JB, it's time for Pick 6, and this week's winner, and those of you that are not familiar with Pick 6, this is brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. They are giving a 6-pack away to whoever's question we choose to respond to on the podcast. So look on our social media account on Twitter at X's and Argos every week as we put out the call for questions. And if your question is picked and answered on the show, you will win a 6-pack of delicious beer from Something in the Water Brewing. Our winner this week is Jerry G. And Jerry G asks, his question is as follows: the Sam linebacker position, still don't understand it. Strong side, what makes it the strong side? I heard the TSN crew speak about weak side linebacker. What makes that the weak side? So first of all, before I respond to this, don't ask NFL fans this question and expect to understand it in a CFL context. It is a little bit different. And don't ask someone from the 1950s this question and expect to understand the answer either. Because again,
even though America uses the terminology, the Canadian Sam backer is very much unique to the CFL.
So just throw out anything you know about American football or 1970s football and think of the Sam backer. He's really misnamed. It's not really a linebacker spot. Traditionally, that's how the American system is set up. That's how the Canadian system used to be set up. So we've kept that name as a strong side linebacker. The strong side linebacker is really not a linebacker at all. It's another defensive back. And that's why guys that play that position are defensive backs. So if a Sam linebacker goes down, you don't replace him with a linebacker. You replace him with another DB, like we saw with Royce Metier coming in to fill in when both Adarius Pickett went down and when Quincy Mauger went down. It's a DB position. And so I've talked over the years, like DT in Winnipeg likes to call it the cover backer spot or the dime backer spot. And that's probably a more accurate way to describe it, but it still appears on depth charts as a strong side linebacker or Sam linebacker. So Sam, and we're only talking CFL here. So Sam, strong side linebacker, Will is weak side linebacker, and Mac or Mike is the middle linebacker. So the Will and the Mac are traditional those are linebackers, and they're the only two true linebacker spots in the CFL, Will and Mac, and that stands for middle and weak. Weak does not have anything to do with strength. It's sort of the opposite that way. The weak side linebacker is much more physically strong than the Sam linebacker. But so it's not about that. It's weak side of the formation and strong side of the formation. Now, how your formation is determined varies a little bit from system to system and coach to coach, but most teams use field. And so the short side of the field is usually the weak side, and the wide side of the field is usually the strong side. This can change depending on how the receivers are deployed, but more often than not, teams will send more of their guys out to the wide side of the field and fewer of their guys out to the weak side of the field or the boundary side of the field. So generally, that's how strength is decided. And so in a base set, just the way that most teams sort of the way they put out their depth charts, the way they often will line up. You've got, for the offense, there's 2 receivers to the boundary side, 3 receivers to the field side. If everyone was playing in cover 1, in man coverage with 1 safety high, this is how they would line up with each other. So to the boundary side, the short side, you'd have your cornerback. The boundary corner would be lined up on the outside receiver. The slot receiver would have the boundary halfback lined up on him. Now, all the way over to the other side, let's go with the wide side first. So wide to the field, wide to the wide side of the field. That receiver is going to have the field corner on him. The next guy inside of him is going to have the field halfback on him. And then the third guy, the most inside receiver to the wide side of the field, is going to have the Sam on him. And those are your DBs, and the safety would be back midfield in that cover 1 look. So that's what strong side linebacker is. Throw out the name linebacker if you want. Call him cover back or call him dime back or whatever it is. He's just another DB, and he's usually like an extra halfback to the most inside halfback to the wide side of the field most of the time. Again, different systems can play it differently, but we get your confusion and frustration, Jerry. It's a great question because it's one that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially if you start Googling, because you're going to find a lot of American answers which aren't exactly the same. JB, let's get to this game preview. So Saskatchewan, 3-0. It's the first road game. It is the reunion of Coach Dinwiddie and Corey Mace and AJ Ouellette and Coach Bell, and it's all happening. And this is also a big game because the schedule does not get any easier. It's at Montreal, at Hamilton versus Winnipeg, Calgary, and back-to-backs, and that's always been death for the Argos in recent years. So this is turning into not necessarily a must-win, but this is a pretty important game. And even without Trevor Harris, this is going to be a tough matchup because you're going against AJ Ouellette and Corey Mace. How do you see the team going into this one? It just seems like it's a reunion every week.
Well, I mean, it speaks to the amount of rebuilding that the Argos have to do in terms of who are they missing from last year. So, I mean, it's a very new team for Toronto. I do think this game is big. This month is really hard. A lot on the road, a lot of good teams. This is a month that could get away from them. I think without Trevor Harris, this inches closer to a must win. Because I do think that they want to try and be 500 when they get to 10 games. And I think this win is pretty crucial to achieve that.
I was on a couple different Saskatchewan radio and YouTube shows today, and a question I kept getting asked was, who has the advantage when you've got opposing coordinators that have worked together before, that have known each other? Like Corey Mace and Ryan Dinwiddie go back. It's not just their time in Toronto. They go back to Calgary. And David Morisuti asked a question to Coach Dinwiddie after practice today. He asked him that sort of question. And I thought Dinwiddie's response, I thought, was pretty good. He's like, we know each other really well. He knows me. I know him. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to execution and the correct play calls. And I think that's a lot of what this game is going to be about. Like, they both looking for who has the advantage there. I don't know if you can necessarily find that. I think it's how they do their job. They both know each other really well. So how well have they prepared their players, and which calls will they make at the right time? And it should sort of boil down to that. There's a matter of talent, and players have to still, be good players and execute. But from a coaching standpoint, I don't know if any one of them has an advantage going in per se. It's just we'll see who calls a better game, and we'll see who has their troops better prepared.
Yeah, I mean, it really sort of boils down to who knows their own, their own habits the better. Which of the two has sort of self-scouted themselves the most. I think usually the advantage goes with the defensive coach in these kinds of situations, because you just have a sense of what they like to go to, what their safe plays are, what are the plays that they like to use when something isn't working. So I would say I would give the advantage to Saskatchewan. because I think that you have a better sense of what an offense is going to do as opposed to a defense where it's just harder to guess what a defense is going to do.
I feel like we have a sense of what Corey Mace is going to do defensively, but you don't know exactly where that's going to come from, and that can change
he's
perhaps
definitely
more
going
easily.
to bring a lot of exotic heat. I think that is without a doubt. He's going to bring halfbacks and safeties and defensive end twists and guys on riding on somebody else's back and guys being catapulted over the line.
And AJ Ouellette is going to get a carry or two on offense, I would imagine, as well. He's going to be he's going to be fired up for this game.
He is definitely going to be fired up. But I think like they're definitely going to come at Dukes. I think that's the nature of it. I think that people will have seen Montreal's film, and there will be, especially in the red zone. I think Montreal brought a lot of heat, and they definitely confused Dukes on his first look in the red zone. And so that to me is where I'm really interested, is if teams are able to turn off Duke's red zone efficiency, that is a big problem moving forward.
Let's take a look at that injury report. And so for Toronto, it's only Quincy Mauger listed on the injury report with the leg injury, and he's obviously going to be out. But that's not to say that it's a healthy Toronto squad, because they've got like 10 guys on the 6-game injured list. When we're watching practice today, there was almost like a second full practice going on in the rehab area, as all of the injured Argonauts are rehabbing from various different injuries and all hoping to work their way back for when their 6th game is up. So it's not a healthy Toronto squad, despite what you may see on the injury report. Saskatchewan, though, has some pretty serious injuries, starting with Trevor Harris. He's not going to play. He's on the 6th game. And so it is going to be Shea Patterson getting the start for the Roughriders. So that's huge. And that's actually game-changing, because that could be... The Argos are listed as 3-point favorites. I think if Trevor Harris is healthy, I think Saskatchewan ends up being favored in this game. That's a massive swing for one player, but that's what you get when you're talking about a veteran quarterback playing as well as Trevor Harris has been, getting them to that 3-0 record, versus Shea Patterson, who we just haven't got a lot of film on. And the film we do have on him hasn't been great. And I like Shea Patterson a lot. As a Michigan fan, I watched Shea Patterson. I cheered for him. And he doesn't look at all like the same guy so far in his limited playing time that he's had with Saskatchewan. But that's a huge injury. And then Sean Bay Jr., who hasn't been at practice this week due to personal reasons, he's listed as out. So those are two massive pieces. Adam Auclair also has been ruled out, linebacker, and running back Thomas Bertrand-Hudon is out as well. So those are some huge hits for Saskatchewan, and that will set up our next segment and your favorite segment, JB. It is time for OCDC. For OCDC, we will start with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. JB, let's switch it up. Let's have you go first this time. We always go first with offense, and I was asked why offense always gets to go first, and I think offense gets to go first because it's me. Yeah, because I'm driving the boat here. So I will pass it over to you, JB. Let's defensive first, OCDC, for the first time in history. What is Saskatchewan's defense going to do to stop the Toronto Argonauts?
Well, I think that they're definitely going to load up on the run. I think they're going to really try and make Toronto beat them via pass. I know that teams have not had, Montreal. They were still able to run in Montreal. I thought, Toronto was able to move the ball decently against Montreal. I think for sure in the middle of the field, they're going to look to load up against the run and put pressure on Dukes. And then in the red zone, I think they're going to bring a lot of heat. I don't think they bring heat in the middle of the field. I think they wait till the red zone, and then that's when they start to bring guys and really collapse things before Toronto is able to react to it. Now we'll see if Toronto goes to more running plays in the red zone to try and counteract that. But if I'm coach, I think that you want to continue to confuse Dukes in the red zone because he's not a guy who's going to beat you deep. So if you can turn Dukes into the feared 2020 quarterback, then you're going to win the game. So I think that's probably how I play it. I think I'm not particularly worried about any of the Toronto receivers, so I'm looking to take run out of the mix, and then just bringing the house on every down inside the 20.
There are a couple of things. This is a bit off script here, but I just wanted to add into what you were saying, because it was stuff that stood out to me in rewatching last week's game against Montreal, where it was stuff I didn't realize the first time through. There were a lot of occasions, like Toronto put up great rushing yards numbers and stuff. They had a lot of runs on first down that went for like 7 or 8 yards. And then on second down, that's when Montreal would like run blitz, and Toronto would run into a wall and actually lose a yard or two. So you'd have this great running stat on first down, and then it would completely collapse on second down. There was a number of plays like that where they weren't necessarily all out to stop the run on first down, but in obvious running situations, they sent the house, and those run blitzes were too tough to beat. I thought that was kind of interesting looking back. And then the other one was in the red zone. Dukes didn't find a couple guys. There were guys open that I didn't realize on first watch. I didn't realize live, but rewatching it again, it wasn't his first reads. His first reads were covered, and that sort of sent him into a bit of a scramble panic mode, and he didn't get to progress through his reads and find the open guy, because there was, on a number of different red zone occasions, an open receiver. So that's something that I'm sure he'll learn from in watching that film too. But just as you were talking about that stuff, I remembered, oh yeah, we haven't had a chance to talk about that yet since I've rewatched the game.
Yeah, and I mean, Edmonton obviously is going to watch that film, and
Saskatchewan, you're mixing up your prairies.
Saskatchewan, sorry, yeah, are going to watch that film, and until you prove otherwise, you're going to be given that medicine.
So my offensive plan for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, I have to think coming into this that Toronto is trying desperately to take away AJ Ouellette, because they don't want his energy, which is contagious, spreading throughout that Saskatchewan offense, especially because they may be coming in with bits of doubt because they've got a new quarterback, they're without their star receiver, and so it may not take much to shut them down entirely mentally. And so you have to think Toronto's going to be trying to extinguish the flame that is AJ Ouellette. And so I want to play off of that and actually run play action to him. So I want quick play action passes. I'm not going to have RPOs because I don't know that I can trust Shea Patterson at that skill set yet. So it's going to be design, play action, quick passes, glance routes, and the like over the middle. And I also want to run Shea Patterson off of that too. Run him out on naked bootlegs, give him an option to pass, but really break that field in half and simplify that. And I think Mark Mueller's the perfect guy for this, because he's had this same experience with transitioning from Bo Levi Mitchell to Jake Mayer. And so it's the same kind of thing that he's been through as a positional coach that he can now go through as a coordinator. And he knows how to customize an offense that was fit for a double-digit veteran, and now simplify it for a first-year starter. And so I think he's going to use some of that cut the field in half stuff. Give him one or two reads. If your guy does this, here's your guy. If your guy does this, here's your guy. If both are gone, then you run, and that's it. 1, 2, run. And so a few situations like that to play off of AJ Ouellette, I think those are going to be great. I think I'd also try and go after Benji Franklin. I think that I don't think it's necessarily been settled yet that he's got it now. He's fine. He played a much better game last week. But I think that's, again, a guy that I would test early. And the problem is, I was thinking initially that would be with Bain, and it's not. That's probably going to be Keyshawn Johnson now instead. And so you kind of have to figure how you want to play that. But I think you want to try and find ways to test Benji Franklin in space. See if he will come up on the short guys in zone and leave the guy in behind him. See if he will get lost in space, as we've seen before. So those are my strategies for attacking Toronto. Let's switch to the good guys, JB. We'll start with your defensive plan for the Toronto Argonauts. How do they shut down the Green Machine?
Yeah, I mean, Saskatchewan's an unusual thing. They are scoring a lot of points. They're not particularly good at anything. Beatty's great at kickoffs, and they're basically pretty good at throwing the ball. They statistically have not been good at running. I know that last game they were improved on that. So they're kind of a weird team to prepare for because there's not something that they do particularly well that you really want to watch out for. Um, they they I think that defensively, without Harris in there, I think defensively, like you say, I think how you want to load up and keep Olet in check in that first half. Because he is going to be somebody that they really feed off, especially in that stadium. You just have to be aware of that. So I think you want to keep him in check in that first half, and you really need Toronto to get the lead. That's where you need to play complementary football. Like Toronto needs to get the lead and really force Saskatchewan out of being able to run AJ in the second half with any consequence. So I think first half, I'm definitely looking to load up against AJ, and then I think with he's not a veteran. He's a veteran, but he's not a starter. I think that you can get after Patterson with a little bit of heat, but I wouldn't as a rule be that concerned about tracking Patterson down with heat. I think if you can keep the running game in check, you're going to be okay. What you really need to rely on is your offense getting ahead and making Saskatchewan play from behind without their normal quarterback. I think if you let Saskatchewan be even, then it becomes a much harder game for everybody. So I know that relies on the offense, but sometimes you need that because the Toronto defense is very good at stopping the run and not great at a ton else. So I think you have to stick with what you're good at. I think you keep doing that and you hope for a little help from the offense.
Switching to the offensive side of the ball, I didn't realize how suffocating Saskatchewan's defense has been in the first 3 weeks against the run. They're really hard to run against. Watching back to the first 3 games, I was surprised at how good their run defense looks. And so I do think it's actually going to be pretty tough. Toronto's been running the ball well. They ran well against Montreal. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be there early, but that's okay. I think there were a couple of points that you can pick on that do actually cater well to Cam Duke's skill set. So number one is I think you attack Deontay Williams, their boundary corner. He's a good player. He's a very good corner, second-year player. But I think him lined up with DeMonte Coxie, there's some matchup there that I like. I think Coxie is going to get the best of him one-on-one, and I think you want to try and isolate that. I would love to see some 4x1 looks where you got 4 receivers to one side, Coxie out there essentially on an island. And if they're going to leave the halfback out to that side too, that's fine. Go to the quad side. But if they're going to leave him one-on-one with Williams, I think Coxie's going to win that matchup more times than not. And I think that he's going to be able to get some double moves off of that too, slants and goes and things like that, that Williams will get stuck on. And so if you can frustrate Williams by hitting some of those quick slants early, hitches, then maybe you look for something big. But I think the key is isolating him and really leaving Williams on an island with Coxie. Again, I'm not attacking a weakness per se, but I like that matchup. I just think Coxie is good paired with Williams. The other thing I want to do is try and isolate running backs on CJ Avery, who I like a lot as a linebacker, but kind of like Edmonton does, Saskatchewan sort of goes with, they've got some injuries too, but they kind of go with like the 2 middle linebacker philosophy almost. And if you can get CJ Avery covering Deontay McMahon, if you can work those matchups and fix it such that you've got a faster back, even Kadeem Carey on CJ Avery, I like that matchup too. So I think those are 2 things that you can exploit. I also want Dukes to run when it's there. I've been praising him for passing first, and I do think that's the way you have to start. But now that he's a bit more comfortable in this offense, he's so good with his legs. I think there are going to be times when he drops back, what he sees isn't something he's comfortable with, or maybe his first couple of reads aren't there. instead of using his legs to extend, I want him to go this week. I want him to actually be a threat to run, because I think that is going to help things later. You don't want to only turn into a running quarterback who's like one read and gone, but I think there are opportunities that he didn't take advantage of in the last couple of games where he could have got some yardage. So those are the three keys for the way I see Toronto's offense beating Saskatchewan this week. Okay, JB, it is one thing. What is your one thing? We were a little bit of a mess last week for one thing. We weren't really anywhere close. What is your one thing?
Well, my one thing was, win dependent, and they didn't do it, and they didn't win. So
yeah, neither was close. So let's try a little better this week, or maybe they should try a little better and follow our one thing.
I only picked the one thing. I usually connect it to how I hope they win. I want to see 2 interceptions. I think that this secondary needs a bit of swagger, of which they had a lot last year.
Yeah.
I think with defense, that's an important part of it. You have to believe that you are the better fighter in the fight. And, they've been very close a couple of times. And I do think, this is a team that's going to, especially with Dukes in, is going to need some picks for field position. I think that's the road to success. So I really want to see not 1, but 2 interceptions from the defense.
That's bold. I like it. My one thing is, I also want 2 of something. I want 2 first down runs that are not quarterback sneaks. So runs that result in first downs that are not quarterback sneaks. So 2 occasions where Cam Dukes drops back to pass, nothing's there, he scrambles and gets a first down. I want that twice. If they can establish that sort of threat, I think that opens up all sorts of space for Cam Dukes in the passing game. So that is my one thing. And predictions. How does this one end, JB? Where are you going with this? How do you see it?
You know what? Without Harris, I'm going to go with Toronto. I feel like Toronto, it's going to be hard winning in Saskatchewan. It's going to be hard winning against Coach Mace. I think Toronto edges out a game 28-27.
That's a tight one. I see it being really close until late, and then the Argos will start to pull away. I've got it Argos 28, Saskatchewan 20. I just think Toronto's a slightly better team, and I think in this situation, they've got the better quarterback. I think with Trevor Harris in there, that would cause me to really rethink how I would forecast this
I think
game.
If Harris is in there, I'd probably give the nod to Saskatchewan, but I think it's big enough to move it to Toronto. I think this is a game they really should win.
It's time for Put Me Down for 20. And JB, your fleeces are in a bit of a state right now. We'll recap what happened last week. So Put Me Down for 20. This is a segment where we always want to remind you, do not take any of our betting advice seriously. Only ever wager what you're comfortable losing. And if you follow our advice, the odds are you are going to be losing. In our case, we are hypothetically betting golden fleeces. We start with 200 and we bet 10 every week on an Argos related bet and 10 every week on a non-Argos related bet. So last week, JB, you were 0 for 2. You had Cam Dukes scoring the first touchdown of the game at plus 900, which is such a tempting number, but did not come through. And you had you set your own line for the Stampeders, winning by 3.5, and they won by 3. And that would have paid off big too. I was 1-1. I lost. I had Toronto plus 3.5, and obviously Toronto lost by 10. And then I had Calgary on the money line, which did come through at plus 145. So I have 234 golden fleeces, 234.5 golden fleeces from my original 200. You have 175, still respectable. So I'll go first this week. So I'm gonna put for my Argos related bet. I'm gonna parlay here. I'm gonna take some chances. I got 2 prop bets. I'm gonna put 10 golden fleeces on this parlay of AJ Ouellette under 56.5 rushing yards and Rashid Bailey over 41.5 receiving yards. And so that and I don't even have my numbers here. I can't tell you what that pays out as right now. I'll have to find that and post that later. But that's my parlay. And then for my non-Argos bet, I'm actually going to go with another parlay, a 4-way parlay here for an East sweep. All 4 games this week are East versus West, and I'm going to say that all 4 East teams are victorious, and that's at plus 1350, which would be a huge win if that comes through, because you've got
feeling confident.
Got two big underdogs in that. Now I may not necessarily go with those same picks in our CFL picks. We'll see. So those are my 2 wager, JB style.
You've adopted my split philosophy.
So where are your fleeces being flushed down this week, JB?
I've gone back and forth a couple of things. So I've made some changes. I think right now for my Toronto-based one, I'm going to go plus 105 AJ Ouellette anytime touchdown.
Okay, AJ touchdown at plus 105.
I feel like they keep him in. I just don't feel there's anything on earth that's going to keep him from the end zone once. So you just need to keep that. I think you just need to keep that in check. Ideally in the third or fourth quarter when it doesn't really matter. And then my other one is I have Calgary Mayor with the over 2 touchdowns at plus 118.
Okay, so this is Mayor. So over 1.5
His over
touchdowns?
is 1.5 touchdowns. Okay. So I've got him at over 1.5 touchdowns against Montreal.
And that's at plus
118.
118, okay.
So perfect. 10 on each.
All right, I got you in there. All right, hopefully you can get back on track with this week. And speaking of getting back on track, we are going to switch over to CFL picks. It was another 4-0 week for me, JB, in the most ridiculous fashion. I'm on a roll. I started 0-2, and I've won 14 straight here, so I'm sure the wheels are about to fall off. You were 1-3 last week, so my total right now, I'm 14-2. You are 7-9.
I'd like to object to a variety of these losses. Hamilton. Seriously, what on earth are you doing?
Yeah, well, their special teams coordinator was fired today.
Yeah, I bet he was. I fired him 2 days ago in my head.
Yeah, it was that squib kick was an odd decision. Although obviously you're not getting fired for one decision like that. But yeah, that obviously resonated with Hamilton's fan base as well.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it also resonated here.
So Toronto at Saskatchewan. I've taken Toronto. I assume you were going with the double blue for that one.
Ottawa, I like Toronto there.
Ottawa at Winnipeg. I'm going with Ottawa only because I said I would not pick Winnipeg until they gave me a reason to pick them, and they haven't given me a reason yet. I could see them easily winning this game. I could see them winning this game by a lot. I wasn't even impressed by Ottawa last week. But I'm going to stick with what I said. Winnipeg has to show me something before I pick them, so I've got Ottawa.
Ottawa, I give you no credit for that Hamilton win. All of the credit is in the overnight bag of the coach that just got fired. I will say Winnipeg will take care of business.
All right, Calgary at Montreal. I actually think this one's going to be pretty close, but Montreal is the best team in the league right now. They have not given me any reason to pick against them, and so for the exact opposite reasons, I don't pick Winnipeg. I'm taking the Alouettes here. What about you?
I have to give Montreal their respect. I've been disrespectful of them at the beginning of the season, picking the Argos to win at home. They are a very well-coached, smart team. They are very good defensively. This is definitely going to be a rock fight. I would be shocked if it's not 22-22 with 2 minutes left, but I'm going to give Montreal the nod.
And then finally, BC at your Hamilton Tiger Cats, JB. I am going to take Hamilton here. I just think this is the week. Once a coach gets let go, things start feeling very serious because now consequences are high, and people start feeling that, and there's a sense of urgency, like this has to happen now, or maybe I'm the next guy out. And I think you're going to get the absolute best from Hamilton this week. I think it'll be just enough to squeak past the Lions, and Hamilton's played the Lions pretty tough. Going back to 2019, 2018. So I'm going to take Hamilton at home. I
am not. I'm going to take BC.
Yeah, I've already written you down.
I think BC is the better team, and I think they're going to come in. And it's always tough to travel across the country, but I just think BC is a better team than Hamilton and will outscore them.
Well, that will just about do it for us on this pregame walkthrough episode of the X's and Argos podcast. It's Thursday Night Football, Toronto at Saskatchewan, 9 p.m. Eastern. You can hear Mike Hogan and I on the call on TSN 1050. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.